we're a UK business. For the last 20 years, we've been helping organisations be more organised in the way that they manage information, both across their projects, programmes, and notably their built asset portfolios as well, be they buildings or linear asset structures, or in the sense of some of our utilities clients looking at their broader utilities networks as well. We develop what's called a common data environment, and we manage both project information, or you may hear the acronym PIM, as well as asset information. And in that regard, you may hear the acronym AIM, and both of those followed on with the suffix of CDE, the common data environment. And really, it's an area that manages data, documents, and spatial information in the context of those project programs and wider estates that you may be managing. We work across a variety of sectors in construction, infrastructure, energy and utilities, retail, and property, and that includes increasingly a footprint in education and universities, who have proven to be very progressive in terms of their estate expansion. And we also work in government and defence, and even across all of these sectors, there are different challenges that are posed. So in retail, it's very much quantum, and how do we drive through at a project level projects across a broader program. It might be perhaps a remodel or a branch refresh program, for instance. Whereas in government defence, clearly there's a big focus on cyber security, and I think when you combine all of those things, you end up with a very rich environment, and ourselves as a vendor able to support those different sectors as well. And here's just a sense of some of the clients that we're working with, and each of those deploying our platform as their enterprise offering to either completely digitize their estate, looking at more assured information delivery from their construction supply chain, conformant to the information management standards that they've adopted organizationally, or if you are in the supply chain, so for instance some of our tier 1 contractors like Balfour Beatty and Costain, how do you actually manage your subcontract supply chain, and in the sense of a design and build process, how do you ensure that information is appropriately delivered at stages of a project, checked, reviewed, approved, and then handed over to the client at the appropriate level of detail. So in terms of what we do, really we get information well organized, and typically if you look at the boundary outside of your organization, it can be a reasonably chaotic space, and we recognize that information needs to be brought together. So lots of single strands of documents that might traditionally be sat across a variety of different siloed systems in your organization, making the role of an estates team or a project manager very challenging when you've got to try and surface that data. So the common data environment looks to provide a framework, a binding point, if you like, for and give you structure around all of your project program and asset hierarchies. And in the context of the way that you're working, it then captures information and logically organizes that. And this diagram here starts to show from an asset owner perspective how we support the management of both project and asset information. And one important thing that we may touch on as a theme today is that of integration as well, because this type of technology doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a broader ecosystem of other systems that you or your clients may be running, and that the information flow is really critical. So why change? At a headline level, why have Group BC been challenged to deliver what we deliver? And from Steve Crompton's perspective as our Chief Product Officer, what is he regularly challenged by in terms of our clients and the broader industry? Well, a lot of that is about industry standards and compliance, and we could revert back to 2011 and our input into the strategy paper that was a forerunner to the Level 2 mandate in 2016. We can look at more recently the government AIM CDE specification and what they're advocating for government departments and agencies to do around the criticality of managing important asset information and insourcing that data very important. And just getting an industry to speak the same language, to be conversant with one another, is very, very important. And the CDE provides, again, that framework, and it provides either a spoon-fed answer or some encouragement when you're interacting with it, to ensure that the information that either you're publishing or consuming is done so to the codified standards that your client and or projects are running to. I mentioned in the government and defence space, but increasingly this hits and affects all of us in any sector that we work, the importance of cybersecurity compliance. And whether you sit in the supply chain or you're a major asset owner yourself, we're working with, for instance, some major airport clients at the moment, and the NIS directive, or the Centre for the Protection of Critical National Assets, CPNI. Very, very important that you are as guardians of that data, maybe important design information, that organisationally, as well as the applications that you're using, are secure, and you can firmly tick box and evidence from a cybersecurity perspective that those critical digital assets that you're managing and maintaining are supported. And I guess linked to that, if you're in the UK, is one of data sovereignty as well. So if you're working in the public realm, the fact that the data not only is published on our soils, but that it's not accessed from or replicated overseas either. And again, we can tick that box in that regard. I think more recently and topically, there's been concerns about main contractor fragility across a number of asset owners, and that's kind of driven this desire to want to insource data, potentially still outsource the service, so enable a tier 1 contractor or consultant to manage this type of information on a client's behalf, but the client has that licensed, so that they end up with a resilient, robust, and a repository complete with full audit trail of all of their project and asset information deliverables, not just at handover, but as that estate changes in use over time. And other drivers and evidence post Grenfell, things like the Hackett report, and the importance of the golden thread, ensuring that all of us can persist and maintain a full audit trail and be confident, rather than Dropbox and email as the metaphor for exchange. We can be confident that actually everything, all of our collaborating supply chain, design teams, contractors, consultants, and clients that we're working with, we've got access to our own audit trails, all managed and maintained through a single environment, supporting us operationally in the delivery of projects into a built estate. And importantly, and I touched on this just momentarily, actually where we're all heading for the future is harvesting this data gold, because when we end up with projects on programs that are delivered into us, and we can do that through a single platform where we've got project and estate teams managing information, we end up with a real rich tapestry of data that, when that's mined and when it's looked at in context of the built asset portfolio, we can start to really drive out some performance, in order that we can recycle that knowledge to improve the optimization of our estate, for instance, or the delivery, the better and more efficient and effective delivery of projects and programs into our clients. So I'll end on there and pass over to my colleague Steve, who will be focused on digital twins.
Thank you very much, Stuart, and again, thank you all for joining this morning. So very shortly, Mike from Sainsbury's is going to talk about the subject of today, which is digital estates. But just to frame this properly, ultimately, when we talk about a digital estate, we're really talking about a portfolio of digital twins. Now, digital twins is a word that's bandied around quite a lot, so I think, again, to frame this in context, it's helpful if we just spend a short while really trying to define this, certainly for the context of this webinar. So ultimately, when we try and answer the question, what is a digital twin? My favorite phrase here is start with the end in mind. ultimately, we are going through a process, and it is a process of gathering information in order to meet an end goal. And quite simply, that end goal is to be able to answer life cycle questions through delivery and operation of that asset. And that's, I think, an important point, because the end actually necessarily is, of course, anywhere through that life cycle. At any point in delivery and operations, I want to ask questions of that asset, and in order to do so, I need to have information at my fingertips to be able to do that more quickly. So these are the sorts of questions. I'm certainly not going to steal Mike's thunder for his presentation, but these are very much real-world questions that we're talking about here, such as what does the store plan look like? Where are the latest plans? How many of a particular kind of asset do we have, and so on and so forth. So, oops, sorry, it's not clicking through. So, when we say the delivery of information to support these questions, therefore, I think this pictorially is a very good breakdown of what we mean. So a digital twin, fundamentally, as we know, is this combination of spatial information connecting data and documents. But it's more than that, because in order to be able to answer questions quickly, accurately, and completely, then we also, I think, have to have those things on the left-hand side, which is the actual qualities of that data. So the first one of those, currencies, I think goes without saying. If data is not current, if it's not up to date, then ultimately I can't rely on that data for answering questions. Now, currency obviously depends ultimately on the question I'm wanting to ask, but being able to see the provenance of that and when it was last updated is critical. Similarly, around that and around the provenance, the data itself has to come from a trusted source. So being able, again, to know not just simply that this data is most recently updated, say, a few months ago, but that it was updated through proper governance gateways and by parties who I trust to do that, will give me further ability to rely on that information. But in order to have all of these things, really, if this information isn't immediately readily available at the time that I want to ask these questions, if it isn't accessible, if it isn't usable, both from a point of view of consumption and from a point of view of continuing to update it, then ultimately we're going to be in a challenge that's faced this industry for some time, which is the delivery of information only to have that information over time degrade in quality and ultimately not be able to be suitable for those questions anymore. And that comes down to the fact that this data in its many forms needs to be able to be maintained. This isn't just a case of delivering information that's gone through all of this hard work and process in terms of managing all of the standards, which we'll talk about, and then handing that over to the client. It's about being able to then keep that data up to date, in line with the picture that we can see here, by having the processes and indeed the tools to be able to make that happen. So if we just look at some examples of digital twins, and I think it's very key that we focus on this as the means to answer questions. So this is one example of a project that we are very proud to talk about, that we've been involved with Wienerberg. You can see on the right and left are different representations of what is the E4 house, which is a templated housing as a service by Wienerberger. And really what we have here is at the same time as the physical house is developed, that we have a digital equivalent of that house being delivered at the same time. If you will, the use case here is that at the same time that the user gets the physical keys to the property, they get virtual keys to that same property. But in fact, they have had keys to that property long in advance when it comes to picking out makes and models of equipment, paint colors, and making sure that all of the information then that as things get physically built in terms of service dates and manuals for that equipment all comes across, so that when it comes to them being able to live in and, if you will, operate that house, that we can very quickly answer normal domestic household questions. But it's not just about buildings. and it's certainly not just about new builds. This is a fantastic example that I love, which is from when we had a couple of students come into our office, and they were here for a week, and we said, right, what we want you to do is create a model of our building, or rather our floor that we're in. And they took on this project, and with a little bit of help in terms of guiding to some outline plans we had and so on, they produced this three-dimensional model that you can see here. But when it came to answering questions about what equipment is in this room and so on, they recognized that there was a challenge necessarily when it came to actually labeling every single granular piece of equipment with an individual QR code. But they themselves independently realized they didn't need to do that. These red cylinders you can see here, which sit inside each room, in fact, provide access in one go to all of the equipment that sits within the room. So when it comes to answering that question, where can I get the manual that's attached to that projector? I don't necessarily need to have the full spatial granularity to do that. It's good enough to know what space something sits in, and to be able to, for example, scan a QR code that then gives me live access to the information about those products. And it's not, in a similar vein, it's not even necessarily about 3D modeling. This, believe it or not, and you can see there top right from Sainsbury's, you're looking at a drawing. So part of the work that we've done in digitizing Sainsbury's estate is to take drawing-based information that was previously locked away on network shares and available to a handful of parties, and make it available to a wider audience by ultimately turning that into a queryable database of asset information. And it's not just about single assets. This is about digital estates, and one of the things here is about being able to manage in a consistent way and quickly access through geographical interfaces all of the entirety of an estate, whether it's a UK-wide estate or whether you're going through, for example, a master plan of that. So how do we achieve such an outcome there? Well, fundamentally, this is where this common data environment comes in, and you can see this most illustrated by these circles here. So Stuart mentioned that there were a few acronyms involved here, but what's important here is we have a contract line, and we have the client on the right-hand side of that contract line, and on the left-hand side we have the various parties who are involved in delivery, each of whom perhaps may have their own common data environments where they are understandably wanting to develop and manage that information, so they have their own records of it, but ultimately they are delivering against communicated requirements from the client, from the contract line, and throwing that information over the fence, so that then that can be validated and ensured that the quality of the information is correct for the client, so that it can then flow into the organization. And Stuart mentioned connectivity, and this isn't just about having one silo of information. I never say that it's the environment that is common, it's actually the data that is common. It's an environment of common data, and it's making sure that through standards and connectivity through APIs, we are then able to service that information through to the other systems of that client's organization. But in order to get there, we have to work back. So we ultimately know we need to be able to ask questions of this information, and in a standard way. So therefore, and I know Mike will talk about this further, we need to be able to add structure to this. We need to have a place for everything so we can find it. And this wonderful metaphor here of a messy garage where I can't find anything, to a sort of a shelving and a place for everything on the right hand side, so I can just get something and then put it back in the same place. That's exactly what we look to set up here as an overall environment. But this isn't just about for the delivery of new information. Fundamentally, we start by getting ourselves in a good place as far as our existing asset information is concerned. This is where we can take these asset breakdown structures, we can reflect these within our common data environment, and then we can take existing legacy asset information and start to put it in the appropriate place, which then gives us a platform to build on. And these standards, which I mentioned, are so important, whether it comes to the naming conventions inspired by 1960 650 and 1192 as was, or whether it comes to the classification. And you know, both of these things, certainly if we forget that one has now become SIF, both of these things are in theory bottles of Jif, but of course, you know, only one of these tastes nice sprinkled on your pancakes in the morning. So the classification, the standards, really then gives us that platform once presented in the context of the asset breakdown structure to be able to communicate out to the supply chain what is required. And this is where things like placeholders and defining what key deliverables are required is so important. And however we do that with advanced technology such as Mike will talk around our expected deliverables, it's about being able to communicate out our needs, about being able to capture from the supply chain simply by dragging and dropping, and importantly, whether I'm using desktop, whether I'm using mobile capabilities, and then being able to validate, check whether or not things, for example, are matching the conventions that I said that they should, and if they are, being able to help the user by automatically populating information there, or even within a browser, being able to carry out clashing before we deliver information to the client, or indeed for the client be able to check that information afterwards. But fundamentally, I said about being able to hide the complexity of all of that delivery and deliver it to an end user through simple, clean, big button interfaces, again, whether on desktop or mobile. But importantly, we must recognize, and the title of this is that digital twins, they grow old, and this is all about the fact that this asset has a lifetime over the decades that it might be in use. There's remodeling, there's install and replacement, refurbishment programs. I won't read what's on the slide. So the most important thing here, I said at the start, is that we can have a framework to ensure not just that we give ourselves a great start by getting that data correct, but we have all the processes and flow to ensure that then that master record within the CDE continues to be an as is, not what it was when it first went across in a project. And that's what we mean by a digital estate. And importantly, that then becomes the source to reference other systems. So this isn't about throwing information into CAFM and then hoping we can keep all of those things up to date within CAFM. This is about having your own master data record, your own digital estate of this information, and then that being able to be fed by and supplied to the CAFM, the ERP, and so on. And Stuart mentioned this earlier. This is very much about, by all means, outsource the service. But if you haven't got hold of your own data, and you know that that data is something which you are able to keep up to date with your various systems, then delivering a digital estate becomes increasingly difficult. And even when it comes, therefore, to the ability to keep this information up to date, this is about having both that asset information model, but also that project information model, where you can ensure that information doesn't just get thrown straight into the AIM, but goes through all those gateways of acceptance, so that as projects deliver, you're still making sure that you've got that quality ensured by that. And fundamentally, that's not just going to come from users, that's also going to come through APIs, through integration interfaces to this information. But we still need to make sure that that goes through all of that, that governance and so on. Now, I'm wary of time, so I'm going to skip over these last things, only that to summarize that really the only thing we haven't talked about is that a digital twin, although it is, of course, predicated on the delivery of information from the supply chain, we must recognize that when it comes to integration, that asset has a context and that asset talks to other systems. So it's also important to focus on the contextual spatial information, the geospatial information that surrounds it, plus being able to link through to other systems, be it project control systems, be it IoT, ERP, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure we will talk about those things at a later date. So just to summarize, it's all around answering questions. Start with the end in mind, but remember that that end is any point through the life cycle. As Mike will show now, the importance of standards and governance cannot be overstated, and it doesn't have to be that they are dictated, but you must be inspired by those standards, and that will ensure consistent reporting, and that we're not reinventing the wheel on every single project. In order to do consistent reporting, we have to have that. And as Stuart said at the start, this is, it's not a necessary evil. Better information management, it's just necessary. And if I leave you with one thought, just remember the information journey of all of this. It isn't just about stopping at the handover of good quality information. Assets will continue to evolve, and we need to have systems to be able to keep that data alive. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We'll just change presenter and hand over to Mike Barber of Sainsbury's.
Okay, so my name is Michael Barber. I am the System and Information Development Manager at Sainsbury's and have been leading Sainsbury's Digital Estate Programme for probably the last 5.5 years. I'm going to spend the next kind of 20 minutes giving you an overview of what does digital estate mean for Sainsbury's, why is it important, what did we aim to include, how did we break that down. We're going to do a brief demo and show you the platform, and then we're going to do a bit where we look at, well, what were the challenges we faced and what were the benefits. So before we kick off, I'm going to take you through a very brief video that gives you a high-level overview of what we delivered.
At Sainsbury's, understanding our estate portfolio has never been so important to us. The focus of our property team has changed from the delivery of hundreds of large projects to thousands of smaller interventions in our existing estate. This increase has put pressure on our current processes and systems. It's also generating more and more information, which then needs to be found and used. This information is required for lots of reasons: to assess the viability of projects, deliver projects, manage the estate, and for statutory compliance. Imagine a household garage where you store lots of different useful items. These grow over time. Items are thrown in randomly, and eventually it's difficult to find what you're looking for. Information about our estate has built up in a similar way. Today, our estate is extensive and diverse, containing over 3,000 sites. Supermarkets, Argos, Habitat, petrol stations, offices, depots, residential apartments, land, and even a duck pond. Each element in our estate has a lot of information associated with it: plans, documents, and data held in lots of systems. For example, just one of our current systems stores over 1.5 million plans and documents. This information increases every time we change a property. If information is not properly stored, protected, and maintained, over time it will become like our messy garage. During our day-to-day operations, we constantly need to answer questions about our estate: how much, where is, which stores, who is, and so on. Although we have loads of data about our sites, locating the information we need can prove challenging. Sometimes it's hard to find information we need to make decisions. Sometimes we cannot be sure that information is accurate, up-to-date, and complete. The time taken to collate information from different places can prove frustrating. As a result, there's a general reliance on colleague and third-party knowledge of the estate. We need to improve this situation whilst continuing to deliver projects and manage the estate. Our digital estate programme will enable colleagues and partners to answer questions, gain insight, and find information quickly, accurately, completely, through better information management and continued systems development. It's not just about new and improved IT platforms. Just as important to its success is changing our approach to information. This includes using common information standards, for example, file naming conventions and classification systems. These codes help us search for and identify the documents we need. Protecting information quality through governance, ownership, and accountability. Colleague and partner engagement and training. All our work is aligned to UK and international standards, using best-in-class systems and prioritised by business need. Digital estate will be an important cultural change for our colleagues and partners beyond IT systems. It will bring the importance of information management to centre stage. Our digitalised estate is not just about improving the now, it's also about being resilient and well positioned for the future. Our vision: to enable colleagues and partners to answer questions, gain insight and find information quickly, accurately and completely.
Okay, so let's step through that in a bit more detail. So why was that important to us? So Sainsbury's are a large asset owner, and from our first store in 1870 right up to now, we own 2,500 trading assets, and ultimately the industry has moved forward quite dramatically. So we didn't have this problem in the past where everything was on paper. We had data and kind of information coordinators, and the big challenge was this rise of the personal computer. And now where we are with this requirement of kind of cloud computing, big data, Internet of Things, we've got so much information that we're just not utilizing properly. And ultimately our systems and our processes need to be aligned so we can maximize that. And we have lots and lots of information, and it's siloed across lots and lots of different systems, and we're constantly wanting to ask questions of these silos to ultimately deliver the BAU needs. So we've got standard BAU functions, we've got this requirement for constant enterprise reporting, and we've got statutory reporting and compliance, and then we've got this need for insights where we want to explore ideas, we want to look at innovations, and we need to continue to invest in our growing estate. So we're constantly asking questions. Our aspiration is to get answers out the bottom, and at the moment it's slow, it's incomplete, and it's inaccurate. So what did we do? We looked at how can we align our systems and how can we bring them together so that actually we can create a single source and we can link our information, and accepting the fact that we have duplicated information across our systems, how do we link them together? So if we update data in one system, it programmatically updates itself in another system, creating this single source. And our aspiration is that it's quick, accurate, and complete, and that when we push the questions through our data set and our information, that we can get the answers out quickly. So the way that we started off was defining a clear vision, which we've already went through, and then breaking down some defined goals. And we tried to keep these quite simplistic. So we looked at how do we upload and how do we find information, making sure we've got a really simple user interface and that uploading the information is really easy for our users. And we recognize that actually the people side of this is how we win. And we need to make sure that updating the information and finding the information is really simplistic. Answering questions. So what are the key questions we want to answer, and how do we ensure that we've got the right information to enable us to answer them questions? And then look at the whole compliance piece. So making sure that we understand not just what have we got, but what are we missing? And all of that has been defined and kind of underpinned by common standards. So we're going to take a bit of time just walking through the different standards we looked at before we then go in and look at how we upload and find our information, how we answer questions, and then how we manage our document compliance. So what does it cover? So before we get into the detail, I'm just going to break down how we set this up. So we started off with how do we manage the estate? So Stuart and Steve have both mentioned the acronym before, but this is our aim area, and how do we manage our existing portfolio and the information required to manage our existing portfolio. And Sainsbury's break it up into three areas. How do we manage our trading estate? How do we manage our non-operational portfolio? And then how do we manage our concession partners? We've got how do we develop on our estate, which is your PIM space. And for us, supermarkets, convenience, PFS, our store support centres and depots, and most recently Argos and Habitat. And there was two key things that we wanted to focus on: our kind of equipment and specs and standards, and then our project and program management tool. And how do we pull all them in together? And then the last bit for us was looking at how do we maintain our estate. So how do we manage our maintenance, and how do we monitor our stores, and understanding that we do that from two functions. We do it from a capital pot, and we do it from an OPEX pot. And the bit that we needed, which we decided to go with Group BC with, is we need that CDE in the middle that ultimately acts as a filing cabinet, as a database. It's got a process manager, and then somewhere for us to store our vast amount of photography. And it was all based on this premise of information supports our decision making. All of that wrapped up in a security layer, so that people only got access to the information they needed, and it's underpinned by an accountability framework and the right data quality and data governance. So that was what we were trying to achieve. And where did we start? So we started off by listening to our colleagues and really understanding what are the business challenges and what's the feedback. And most of it, and none of this, was a massive surprise to us, but it was difficult to find stuff. We don't trust the information we find. We rely too heavily on our third parties. And there's multiple copies of information. I don't know which one's the latest one. Then we looked at the hierarchy of how our information is set out, so that we create a common standard across all of our systems. So we looked at how do we set up our hierarchy, and the way that Sainsbury's break it up is we got zones right at the top, and it's quite simplistic: North, Midlands, South. We then break that into zones. Then we have locations, and a location is a piece of land, and on that land is a collection of assets, and whether that's a building, a car park, or in the diagram an Argos or a petrol station. Within them we have occupancies, and then occupancies may be within the building. You have a supermarket, you have a collection of concessions, we may have some sublets where we put gyms in, and then inside that we've got different levels, and then going right down after levels we've got collections of types of areas, so whether that's a type of meeting room or a type of kind of office or breakout area. And then in the blue we've got the individual rooms and spaces, and the same with inside them we have component types, so we have a type of table and then you've got components, which are your individual tables. Steve's already alluded to this, but we then looked at our whole classification and making sure that if we take the example of table again, we have multiple different types of table, whether that's a prep table where you look at preparing food, or whether that's an office table. They're very different properties, and we need to make sure that we can classify them so we can easily find stuff, so people are getting the right equipment. We looked at standardizing our levels, and we've got some really complex buildings where just because you enter in one level at the north side, you go to the south side, and actually you're entering at a completely different level of the building. So how do we standardize that so that we have a consistent approach across our estate? File naming convention. So this was probably the biggest change we implemented. So Sainsbury's are not an ISO compliant company, nor do they need to be, and trying to implement a robust set of standards when the company isn't ISO compliant has been challenging. So we decided to align to the 1192 standards and implement as on the screen. And then we looked at workflows. So again, looking at 1192 and the fact that we're trying to achieve this. How do you get from WIP into AIM, and how do you get from WIP into PIM, and then how do you go from PIM to AIM, and then ultimately back to PIM again? So we've built a whole workflow around how does that happen, to make sure we've got the right governance in place and to make sure that people have access to the information when they need it. And then there was a massive engagement piece. So understanding who do we need to speak to, when do we need to speak to them, who needs to know, making sure that we're taking people on that journey. Massive culture change. So I'm now 3.5 years into this, since we started to implement BC. And the biggest challenge we found was actually getting people to understand what are we trying to achieve and why. And this is when we came up with this this metaphor of a garage. And ultimately, you have a storage area, and your standards that we've just run through is about defining the locations and the house rules and the shelving units, etc. And ultimately, we want to deliver what's on the left, not what's on the right. And how do we do that? We did a big review on our processes and looking at, with all the investment we were doing, with the new system we're putting in, we're going to deliver this new kind of shiny garage. And how do we make sure that we don't erode that and that our information is being protected and maintained? Because it's not just delivering the system is one part, it's that people and process bit that's probably more important. And within my team, looking at how do we audit and how do we check to make sure that people are doing what we've asked them to as asset owners, and that our contractors are delivering the quality that we need to be able to effectively manage that building in the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next kind of 10 minutes looking through BC as a platform, and that was the our aspiration. At the moment, we've delivered the top half, so we've delivered our aim space, we've delivered our project space, got the CD in the middle. We haven't delivered and connected it to our facility management system yet. And we're going to have a look at them three things. So jumping into BC, let me refresh that. So this is our instance of Business Collaborator. So we've got a nice simple landing page. We've got some quick links around, show me all of the spaces classified within my portfolio, show me all of my assets, so my buildings, show me all of the investments that are happening across the estate that I have access to, show me the programs, and then we have some quick links to where we've got like a common room, news updates, you have a personalized dashboard, and then some recent spaces. You've got a nice powerful search engine on the front. So if I want to go and find a specific space, I can type in the word demo, and it will then give me all of my assets with the word demo in, all of my investments, programs, locations, etc. So we're going to jump in to my demo asset, which isn't called demo, it's called concept. So we're going to look at my demo asset, and within this demo asset, we're going to walk through click on that. Yeah. So this is what a space looks like in BC. We've got a nice simple UX. Zooms to the map based on this location. So my demo area, I put in the middle of the sea. We can see the investments that sit hierarchically underneath that asset, and we have a collection of quick links. So on my asset, so we're in the aim space at the moment, I can find all published information associated to that asset. I can find the latest retail plan for that asset. I can review our health and safety file, which we'll have a look at in a minute. I can review the expected deliverables that are associated with this asset, or I can search for an individual key document on this asset. I have a drag and drop platform. So if I want to upload anything to this asset, I can drag it onto this screen, and the whole screen becomes a drop platform, and it then files it based on some predetermined rules, which we'll touch on later on. And then I have a personalized dashboard. So in this particular asset, I don't have anything, but when we go and look at a project, we'll be able to see what the dashboard looks like. And just looking at some of these areas, and Steve alluded to it earlier on, but you can set up these links to give you a nice, clear overview. So I'm now looking at my existing health and safety file, and across here, our health and safety file is split into 6 different sections. We can look at our certificates, and we can fire up, show me all architectural certificates associated with this asset. Or I can look at protected key documents. So these are the documents that we want to look after and we promote up to our asset space. We break it down by discipline. So I want to look at retail and architecture. I want fire off the latest store plan or the latest building shell, or I want to look at give me the fire strategy plan for this asset. And then that is how the user can navigate through. But we've also got this capability of expected deliverables, where as a kind of a manager of this space, I want to understand what things are missing and what's not delivered. So I can go and look at my expected deliverables for my existing estate, and the two areas we just looked at, health and safety and protected key documents, I can see that of the 52 things in my health and safety, I've got 144 of them have been fulfilled, but I'm waiting on 8 things, and I can expand that out and then look at the areas that I'm missing information, and you can dive down and see your individual requirements. I'm missing some information around highways, and again I can dive right down and see that I've got one thing fulfilled, but I'm missing an as-built drawing. So straight away we can set it up and understand exactly what information we're missing within the system. So that's our existing estate area and the aim space. Let's jump down into the project space and have a look at it. So what we've also done is we had lots of feedback when we first launched around people getting lost around your asset space and your project space. So we color code it. Our assets are blue and our investments are green, which also helps when we look at the map interface. So I'm now in the project space. I can see on this project, I've got one thing to do. We've got lots more links. So within this project, I can put some quick links to take me back up to show me my existing asset information, show me my existing health and safety file, which saves you having to navigate around the system. It just fires up the same screen, so it takes me directly to this area. Search for a key project document, or search for published key information by a certain role. Search by stage. And you can navigate through to find your information nice and quickly. We've also got a collection of subfolders, which has been migrated from existing systems. So this was a legacy system that was mentioned in the video that had over 1.5 million documents. All of them have been migrated over to BC, and we can easily access our asbestos, asset reports, client briefs, etc. And this investment is ultimately part of a program. So you can associate additional data to this, and we can navigate to the program. So this particular investment or demo investment was part of a program, and on that program we have a collection of other investments. So as a program manager, I want to understand, well, show me all of the programs that are associated. So if I click on there, I'll get a list of all the investments. You can see we've now got a map rendered that shows me all of the associated investments on here. I can review the required expected deliverables. So we looked earlier on at the expected deliverables for an asset. At a project level, I can define, well, actually, what expected deliverables do I need for this project? So we have a predetermined template, and on that template, we can say these are required and these aren't required. We can review the state of expected deliverables that will then fire up either the Gantt chart that we looked at before, or we can fire up some dashboards and look at what do I require, what does my team require to deliver, or what's everything required across this program. And we can review kind of the state of our health and safety file. So what we're going to have a look at now is we're going to fire up the map and have a look at the map render. And then what you've also got within some of these portlets, which I didn't mention before, is you've got this document search portlet, where again, the documents associated with this space or this program, you can run a system-wide or a space search that says, show me all documents associated with this program. You can build that filter how you like. So now we're in the map view, and this map is filtered just to show me the results of the program that I was in. I can click on one of them spaces and it will show me all of the individual pieces of work with the icons allocated. So our icons are based on the status of a project. We can look at the key, And the key says for investments, it shows you the classification, which is in green. These are our different statuses. So we can see what investments are on hold, what are completed, feasibility, live, removed. And we get the little flag on each one. And then we can expand one of them and see the associated details. And I can click on it and navigate to that project. So it was really important for us to have a really simplistic kind of UX view. So before I wrap up, the last thing I want to show you is how we upload information. And one of the big benefits to us was this capability of Sainsbury's can deliver anywhere between 5 to 10,000 initiatives over the year. And one of the big challenges that we face into is we spend a lot of time filing stuff. And through the importance of a naming convention, so this is an example of how our files are named. We were very passionate about, actually, I don't want to spend time navigating to 800 projects. I've got lots and lots of different files with lots of different names. I can grab them files. That's working really well. Okay, and only let me grab 3. Process them on the system. And I can grab, whether I grab 3 or whether I grab 500, the system will work through and process them. So it knows where to put them, and you can see it's put them in different projects, creating them as new files. And I can walk through the file and process to put them in the right location, to send them on a workflow, and basically determine where the information sits. And conscious of time, so just to wrap up then, that's a brief overview of how the Sainsbury system works. Just going to finish off with some of the challenges that we faced. So breaking down the elephant, this for us was a massive change, and ultimately became a big change process. And how do you break down the elephant and try not to boil the ocean? Manage the level of change and take people on the journey. The success to any system deployment is people, and if they don't understand what's in it for them, moving on to the second one, you will struggle with adoption. Reviewing processes to understand if it's fit for purpose. So making sure it's not a case of just getting a system and implementing the system with your existing processes. Look at how you find that balance, and moving on to the last one. How do you find that balance between aligning with software capabilities and software limitations with your business requirements and your business aspirations? And that's a balancing act. And then what are the big benefits? So for us, standardizing made everything so much faster. Finding information, filing information. We had big benefits and ultimately big savings from speeding people up and being able to answer them questions faster. A single source of truth through system integration removes manual information. So again, there was 2 parts for us. It sped things up, but it also gave us confidence in information, because we knew it could only be updated in one space or one place, and it updates programmatically everywhere else. Efficiency in filing data and documents reduces costs. So if we look at one of our programs, we might be rolling a program out, and that program is being rolled out across 600 stores. Without some of the automation we've got, you'd have to navigate into each individual project and manually upload them. We can go onto our homepage and upload to all 600 projects at once. The automated and reportable expected deliverables. So I touched on expected deliverables quite briefly, but through all of that is automated. Someone uploads a document and that document goes on a workflow. You have a corresponding expected deliverable that may be, I'm waiting on a 5 strategy plan. As long as it goes through your predefined requirements, it just ticks the box and says, I have been delivered, and then your project or program manager can see what they need to do. Or if I'm the individual and it's a task set to me, it will come on my dashboard. And then we've got the kind of the simplification and automation reduces costs. One of the big things we've done is automate as much as possible. All the laborious tasks that people don't like doing, automate. And then having trust and confidence. One of the big bits of feedback we had was that people don't trust our information. And some of that was based on confidence. Some of that was based on duplication, because we held stuff in so many different locations. Some locations got updated and others didn't. By removing duplication, or by creating this single source and putting the right processes in place to protect and maintain, we have driven business confidence and individual confidence. And that's it from me. So hand back over to Stuart.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. That was a fantastic walkthrough. Some really valuable insight to the journey that you've been on. Really appreciated. I'm just very conscious that we're in the wrap-up period here. So I think what we've done through this morning's webinar really is to give some support and guidance, but we started with really challenging each and every one of you to look at perhaps where you are today and what the opportunity of moving to a more organized state in support of your business stakeholders, be they colleagues internally that are delivering projects or managing estates, or even the teams that you're interfacing with, be they your supply chain, or potentially even your FM teams that you're engaging. I hope it's really shone through of the importance of well-managed information. I think the message now is about getting started, and regularly we're confronted with that question of how do we eat the elephant. It really is challenging, notably if we've got a legacy estate. So having started work recently with Heathrow, an airport that opened in 1946 and has gone through some quite significant change across their estate, and notably a large expansion program in place at the moment, you can understand why the scale of that type of project and the people process bit is so important before technology gets introduced. So do think about that and do reflect. Look behind the sofa. Look underneath the carpet. Do ask your colleagues what their day-to-day challenges are. And put a sense of priority around your approach in logical steps. There are a wealth of resources. So beyond educational sessions like today, when you look out into the market on the PIM or the project information side, there's a whole wealth of information. We're members of the UK BIM Alliance. Do look at their site. I found and recommend to graduate starters in our business the Scottish Futures Trust implementation of a common data environment is a particularly easy, digestible read. And then on the asset information side, if you Google the government department for BIM here, the asset information management common data environment, there's a particularly useful document there as well. And then the implementation, I think like anything in terms of a change project, break it down into manageable, definable chunks, go into the project with strong strategic intent with defined milestones. All of you tuned in today will do deliver projects for a living, and this type of project is no different in the way that it should be addressed, the way that the project mandate and objectives should be set, the way it's resourced, the steering group that you put in place, and then importantly the relationships that you have with other stakeholders, including the vendor that you work with, so that you set the right levels of expectation for delivery, both with your executive when you're planning out the business case and giving them a program, but equally with the business as well, who will be chomping at the bit to get access to this enriched set of digital information quickly. So we do welcome your feedback on today's webinars. Do request online demonstrations or workshops. From our perspective, we really like to listen and understand where you are culturally, what your acceptance for this level of transformational change and digitization is, what your challenges are at an executive level, getting these business cases proven. And we've been through it with a number of clients in both the public and private sector, and would welcome supporting you in that as well. We have had, I've just been alerted by a colleague here, we've had a number of questions that come through, so I'll direct these initially to Steve. Steve, question raised here: what information management standards does the BC platform support?
Well, so anyone who knows anything about our history will know that we've been quite a pioneer in implementing the emerging, as they were at the time, the standards around information management for BIM, having delivered back in 2006 the first level 1 BIM project, which was Westfield Stratford City. Since then, we've continued to do that. We have a standard configuration which absolutely embraces the principles of ISO 19650. But I think what I would also say is, in my experience, as much as these standards exist, they are a framework and by which many clients are inspired by these standards, but ultimately, they have a flavour of those standards that best reflects their own business. And we're very fortunate that the flexibility that we have allows us to support those varying uses of the inspired standards. And I just give one very short example, which you saw today, which was in fact around classification, which within ISO 19650, of course, would reference Uniclass, but within the retail space, there are retail classification standards from CLSFP, which have been configured into the CDU.
Great, thank you. Mike, there's a couple for yourself, if you'd like to unmute. First question: what would you say is the biggest single factor underpinning the business case for change when you decided to start on this journey? What really resonated with your executive when you pushed to sponsor this through?
I think probably the biggest bit was the feedback from users. So we were getting, we did a company-wide a divisional survey that just said, look guys, what's your biggest frustration? And top of that was tools to do the job, and this referred to kind of system software and the lack of trust they had in our information. So we were getting quite vocal feedback from our colleagues that actually we don't have what we need to enable us to do our job. And it feels like every time we start a project, or every time we want to make a decision, we have to either go out and survey, or we have to mobilize a team to spend lots of time finding the information we need to know to make an informed decision. So for us, it was all about how do we mitigate that so that people could make informed decisions quickly.
Okay, brilliant. And the final question, Mike, just to wrap up. One of the challenges with systems is how do you get your supply chain engaged and adopted? What have Sainsbury's done in that regard?
So the bit for us was getting to the point where people understood what was in it for them and why should they care. So one of the examples, and I mentioned it before, around kind of automation and getting software to a point where it makes people's lives easier. We had a big challenge where nobody likes to do laborious tasks, and if we just look at how we mass file things, and I didn't mention it into any great detail, but we also, when we file something based on the naming convention, it auto tags all of the information. And through the technology that was delivered, we've removed a lot of laborious stuff. And by doing that, we can then turn it on to, we need to do this because it's the right thing for the business, but we can also then, to our suppliers and our users and externals, they can understand, well, there's the benefit to them and this is how we're making their life easier. And also aligning to standards, more and more kind of asset owners will be trying to go into that direction. It also creates a level of consistency so that each of your kind of external consultants aren't doing lots and lots of different things for different people. the aim, and when we started this 5 years ago, it was a big step change for people. The feedback we're getting now is actually people are moving towards a more standard drawing and document naming convention, and it's becoming more of the norm. Still a long way to go, but we've definitely moved on as an industry quite a lot.
Excellent, Mike. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time, so I'll wrap up there. Once again, for all of you that are attending today, really appreciate you registering and logging in. If you've got any final feedback or questions, do come back to us with those, and we do hope to see you on future webinar broadcasts again. Thanks very much indeed.